Mike, what do you think about this?
Well,
whole
and
situation?
BYU also scheduled Notre Dame for six games, so that'll be interesting too. But I completely agree. I've had this debate with plenty of people since last night. Boise State, great win against Virginia Tech. They came out, they got the job done. Kellen Moore looked fantastic, looked like he's a Heisman candidate. He looked like a great player. But again, when you play the 87th easiest schedule in the country, come on. You don't deserve to be there. Look at teams in the Big Ten. If Iowa, Ohio State, or Wisconsin have one loss and Boise State's undefeated and there's another undefeated team, Boise State played in the WAC, Iowa, Ohio State, Wisconsin played in the Big Ten, played a much more difficult schedule. In my opinion, there's no question Boise State should not go to the national championship if something like that happens. I completely agree with you, Alex.
Well, I guess I'm the only one that's going to say Boise State should go to a national championship. Under no circumstance should they go to the national championship if there's an undefeated team or if there's two undefeated teams from BCS conferences. But I would put them in the championship over a one-loss, even Ohio State team, a one-loss Florida team. Not necessarily because I believe that they're a better team, but I think they do deserve it now. If we want to say that Boise State does not deserve it, then all teams have to do is beat them. If Virginia Tech beats Boise State last year, beats them this year, we're not having this discussion. They've done well in their BCS bowls. Last year, everyone thought that they were going to lose to TCU because TCU actually played a difficult schedule last year. And you talked this year about Boise State having the 87th most difficult schedule, a cakewalk of a schedule. Look at Nebraska. Nebraska plays one ranked team this year, and it's at home. Nebraska really does not have that strong of a schedule. They play in one of the weakest divisions in college football, the Big 12, Big 12 North. I think at this point, what Boise State has done over the past 5 years, what they've done in the BCS games, what they've done against teams ranked in the top 10, consistently winning, they do deserve to go to a national championship.
The problem is you cannot think about what they did in the bowl games last year. It's a clean slate this year. It's what have you done this year? What is your body of work this year? And by the end of this season, I would take a two-loss SEC team over an undefeated Boise State team. And I know, let's take a look at what happened a couple years ago where we had a two-loss LSU team, and then we had an undefeated Hawaii team that just ran through the WAC. What happened? Hawaii went and got throttled by Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, and then LSU won the national championship versus a one-loss Ohio State team. Both those teams, all three of those teams, clearly better than Hawaii. The WAC is not a good football conference.
When I argue for Boise State, though, I'm not saying that the WAC is a good conference. It's a terrible conference. But what else? I mean, you did lay out what Boise State can do. They can switch conferences. They can go independent, get a more difficult schedule. But what they have done with their schedule is they have scheduled difficult teams. People are saying get away from the blue turf. Well, this year they traveled across the country to Landover, Maryland. They played basically in Virginia Tech's backyard and still beat them. It's time to give them a chance at the national title. They've paid their dues, winning their BCS bowl games. They've beat good competition. You say what they did last year doesn't matter, but they returned 20 starters from last year's team. How can it not matter what they did last year? They proved themselves last year. They proved themselves in the past 5 years. If they run the table, they deserve to go to a national championship if there are not two undefeated BCS bowl teams.
I'll be brief because I know we got to move on. I think you both make excellent points. My only thing is that you're right, Nebraska plays the 76th most difficult schedule in the country. But if you put a team like Kansas State or Missouri in the WAC, they would run the table. Does anybody think they're a national championship caliber team? Absolutely not. Maybe Kansas State plays the same schedule as Boise State, loses to maybe Oregon State, maybe they lose to Virginia Tech, and then they probably run the table and win every other game. So I don't really buy that argument, but I think I understand what you're saying in a sense. Boise State, ranked as high as they are in the preseason, and based on their body of work building up to get to this point, they'll have a legitimate shot. But again, they don't play the grind of the Big 12, more physical, more talented teams, depth in the trenches that a team like Nebraska would.
Absolutely. Good discussion, but we've got to move on to some games going on this weekend. One of them, number 20 Florida State takes on number 7 Oklahoma in Norman. Jake, do you got the Seminoles or do you got the Sooners?
Well, Florida State was very impressive last year. Granted, they played Samford, but if you look at Christian Ponder's line, he was 12 of 14 for 4 touchdowns. That means he had more touchdowns than he had incomplete passes, which is just incredible. You look at Oklahoma, they did not have a very impressive game over Utah State. They won by just 7 points. Their defense gave up 341 yards passing. They did intercept the Utah State quarterback 3 times, but if they don't shore up that defense, they're going to have problems with Christian Ponder. With that said, I did pick Oklahoma to win the Big 12. I'm not going to bail on them just because they had one shaky game. DeMarco Murray did run for over 200 yards last week. Bob Stoops loves his offensive line. I think Oklahoma is going to rebound. They're going to beat Florida State this week.
Mike.
Oklahoma hasn't lost a home game since 2005. And it's going to happen this week. Florida State, Christian Ponder is going to light up Oklahoma's weak, soft secondary. Utah State put up over 400 total yards against Oklahoma. I like Christian Ponder to look for Taiwan Easterling and Burt Reed, 2 tremendous, speedy wide receivers. I like Florida State to put up big numbers, sort of a shootout game. I agree with you, DeMarco Murray had a tremendous game. Finally looks like the player he's supposed to be. But Florida State goes into Norman and shocks the world and gets a big win for the ACC because the ACC hasn't had one in a long time and they need to rebound from that game against Boise State.
Not only has Oklahoma not lost a home game since 2005, they only lost 2 last decade. That's why they're going to win this game. And, you know, we're talking about how their defense was so bad, but they don't need to win a game with defense. Florida State had one of the worst defenses in college football last year, and I didn't see anything from Sanford. They're not that good of a team, so of course their defense is going to look good against them. Now, I'm a little bit worried about Oklahoma at the quarterback play. Landry Jones did have 2 interceptions last week, but I think DeMarco Murray on the ground gets it done. It's a shootout. I can see both of these teams combining for like 80 points, something like that. It's going to be a crazy game. Oklahoma, get the Sooner Schooner out, get that big old gun thing out. They're going to win this football game. Bob Stoops gets another big win.
Boomer Sooner.
Just get
Boomer
ready.
Sooner.
Let's go Noles.
Okay.
Let's go Noles.
Well, Mike, will your love fest for the ACC continue as number 13 Miami travels to the Horseshoe to take on number 2 Ohio State?
No, I think the Buckeyes win this game. I can't stick with the ACC on this one, but I do think it's close. I think it comes down to a field goal. Ohio State wins this game late. I think the key matchup you have to look at, and this happens in a lot of games between big teams, you have to look at the trenches. Ohio State, tremendous offensive line play. Miami returns 3 of their 4 starters on the defensive line and all their linebackers from last season. Coming off, the Miami team's coming off a dominant performance against Florida A&M. I know it's Florida A&M, but looking good early, didn't look shaky. The wide receivers on both teams match up really well, but I like Ohio State in the Horseshoe with the running game, pounding it out in the end, a late drive to get a field goal and get the win. Close, though.
And I like that you talk about that running game. Sane last week had 2 touchdowns, over 100 yards on the ground, and that defense for the Buckeyes only gave up 44 rushing yards against Marshall. Marshall didn't even have any points on offense. And I know Marshall's not that great, but this is a team that went to a bowl game and won a bowl game last year against a pretty good Ohio team. Jake?
I'm going to pick Ohio State as well. They looked good against Marshall. Miami looked good in their opener too. Ja'Cory Harris had a pretty decent game, 12 of 15 for 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. But I do like Ohio State in the trenches. We saw it last year with Miami versus another Big Ten team, Wisconsin. Wisconsin pretty much dominated that game after an early touchdown from Florida. They scored 20 unanswered points. I like Ohio State at home to win this game over Miami.
Yeah, Terrell Pryor, 247 yards in the air, 3 touchdowns. Looked like a Heisman candidate last week, but for both of these teams, competition level going way
Yeah,
up.
and I think we're going to see the schizophrenic play of Ja'Cory Harris continue this season. Last year, he led the country in interceptions. Obviously, against Florida A&M, looked great, but I think in this game he gets tested by a far superior defense, and they just can't quite pull it out.
And talking about superior defenses testing each other, number 19 Penn State travels to Alabama. Number 1 Alabama. Alabama hasn't lost a regular season game since November 24th, 2007, Jake. Are they going to do it this week?